My mother stood at the head of the Thanksgiving table, wine glass raised, and announced that she was giving my sister Cassandra $50,000 toward a down payment on a house. Then she looked right at me and said nothing, not a word. Just turned back to Cassandra, clinked her glass, and said, "You've always been the one who made us proud." My husband Derek reached under the table and found my hand. My daughter Lily, 7 years old, was sitting right next to me. She heard every single word. I am 34 years old. My name is Nora, and I spent the better part of a decade convincing myself that if I just tried harder, gave more, asked for less, my mother would eventually see me the same way she saw Cassandra. That dinner was the night I finally stopped trying. Let me back up, because none of this happened in a vacuum. Growing up in our house in Dayton, Ohio, the roles were established early. Cassandra was 2 years older than me, and from the time she could talk, she was the daughter my parents showed off. She was louder, more confident, knew how to perform happiness in a way that made my mother beam. I was quieter, more bookish. I asked too many questions and cried too easily, which my mother always described as being difficult. My father passed away when I was 12, and after that, it got worse. My mother leaned on Cassandra for her social life and leaned on me for everything else. I was the one who helped her organize bills when she couldn't focus. I sat with her through the bad nights. I drove her to appointments when Cassandra was too busy. Not once did my mother ever describe any of that as making her proud. It was simply expected. By the time I was in my mid-20s, the financial requests had started. They were small at first. $100 here, a car repair there. But then Derek and I got married and had Lily, and suddenly the requests came with a sharper edge. My mother needed help with her property taxes. She needed a new furnace. She needed to borrow money for a trip she was taking with Cassandra to Sedona for healing. I paid for that trip. I found out later that Cassandra had already refused to contribute. When I asked my mother once, gently, why she never asked Cassandra to chip in, she looked at me like I'd said something absurd. "Cassandra is building her life," she said. "You and Derek are stable." What she meant was, "You'll say yes. Cassandra won't." Over 7 years of marriage, Derek and I calculated it once. Not to be petty, but because we genuinely needed to understand our own finances. We had given my mother just over $40,000, loans she never repaid, expenses she never acknowledged, emergencies that were never quite emergencies. Cassandra, in that same period, had given nothing, and she was getting $50,000 as a gift. The night of that Thanksgiving, I kept it together at the table. I smiled, I ate turkey. I let Cassandra hug me on the way out while my mother watched with that satisfied expression she got when everyone was playing their parts correctly. In the car, on the way home, Lily was quiet for a long time. Then, from the back seat, she said, "Mom, did you do something wrong?" I looked at Derek. He was already gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. "What do you mean, bug?" I said. "Grandma gave Aunt Cassie a lot of money," Lily said, "but she didn't give you anything. So I thought maybe you did something wrong, and that's why." I will never forget that sentence for as long as I live, not because it was devastating, though it was, but because my 7-year-old had already started building a framework to explain my mother's behavior, and the only framework that made sense to her was that I had done something to deserve it. I was not going to let my daughter grow up believing that. I told her, as calmly as I could, that sometimes grown-ups make choices that don't have anything to do with what other people deserve, that she hadn't done anything wrong, that I hadn't done anything wrong. Lily seemed to accept that, and she fell asleep before we got home, but I didn't sleep at all that night. The following Monday, I called my mother. I told her, as plainly as I knew how, that Derek and I would no longer be contributing to her expenses. No more monthly transfers, no more emergency loans, no more. I said the words clearly, being the family bank while Cassandra got rewarded for doing nothing. My mother's response was immediate and familiar. "I never asked you to do any of that." Which was a lie so polished she probably believed it herself. Then she said, "I just thought you were in a better position than your sister." Then she cried. Then she told me I was being cruel. I stayed on the phone through all 3 stages because I had learned over 34 years exactly how her escalation worked. When she got to the part where she said, "I don't even know who you are anymore," I told her I loved her, and I hung up. The text started within the hour. Then Cassandra called, which I let go to voicemail. Her message was about 45 seconds of how I had humiliated our mother on a family holiday and how I needed to get some help for my obvious resentment issues. I saved it, not for any particular reason, just because I was done pretending it hadn't happened. Here's where things shifted in a way I did not expect. Derek's parents, Frank and Elaine, lived in Asheville, North Carolina. They had always been warm to me in that easy, undemonstrative way of people who simply behave decently without needing recognition for it. I liked them, but I had kept a little distance because I didn't entirely trust warmth, which is probably a sentence that deserves its own story. About 3 weeks after the phone call with my mother, Elaine called me. Just me, not Derek. She said she'd heard a little of what had happened and that she wanted to say something. I braced myself. She said, "Frank and I have been putting money aside for years. We want to give it to Derek and you, not as a loan, and not because of anything, just because you are our family and we can." I started crying before she even finished the sentence. Not pretty crying, the kind where you can't talk and you have to just breathe until it passes. She waited. Then she said, "We also think you should take a real trip. Lily is old enough to remember it. Frank and Elaine gave us $30,000. I want to be honest about that number because I think dishonesty in stories like this is what makes people stop believing them. It wasn't a fortune. It didn't fix everything. But it was the first time in my adult life that someone in a parent role gave me something without a ledger attached. We used part of it to take Lily to Costa Rica for 10 days. Derek and I renewed our vows on a beach outside Tamarindo with Frank and Elaine there, and a stranger as our officiant who kept mispronouncing Derek's last name. Lily wore a yellow dress and spent most of the ceremony trying to catch a lizard near the chairs. It was the best week of my life. My mother called twice while we were gone. I texted back both times, "We're traveling, we'll connect when we're home." When we got back, I did call her. The conversation was 15 minutes and mostly surface level, which was new for both of us. She didn't ask for anything. I didn't explain anything. We talked about the weather in Dayton and a show she was watching. When I hung up, Derek asked how it went. "Fine," I said, and I meant it. That is the part that is hard to explain to people who haven't lived inside a dynamic like this one. The ending isn't usually a dramatic confrontation where the other person finally understands and apologizes and becomes someone new. My mother is not going to one day sit me down and say she sees me clearly now. Cassandra is not going to redistribute her inheritance. None of that is coming. What changes is you. What changes is what you're willing to accept as normal. The night we got back from Costa Rica after Lily was in bed, Derek and I sat on the back porch with cheap wine and the specific tiredness that comes from being genuinely happy for several days in a row. "She asked me something on the beach today," Derek said. "Lily, what did she ask?" He smiled. "She asked if this was what family was supposed to feel like." I looked at him. "What did you say?" "I said, yeah," he said, "pretty much exactly like this." I thought about that for a while. About a 7-year-old recalibrating her understanding of what she was allowed to expect from the people who were supposed to love her. About how the best thing I could give her wasn't money or a perfect childhood or a grandmother who treated her mother fairly. It was the truth, shown to her clearly and consistently, about what love actually looks like when it's not being used as leverage. The wine was terrible. The night was warm. Somewhere inside, my daughter was asleep without a single question about what she had done wrong. That was enough. For the first time in a very long time, that was exactly enough.